Hi friends, a warm welcome to all. In this video, we are going to discuss about the revolt of 1857. Let's move on to the video. So, the revolt of 1857 was a major uprising in India between 1857 to 1858 against the unjust rule of the British East India Company. The revolt served as the British Crown sovereign power. It started on May 10, 1857 at Meerut as a Sepoy mutiny. The Sepoys were initiated in Bengal Presidency against the British officials. So finally, East India Company's rule came to an end. So this revolt was largely confined to parts of northern and central India. So let us see. So what is revolt? So the revolt of 1857 is also known as the Great Rebellion, the Indian Mutiny, the Indian Insurrection, and the War of Independence. This rebellion began on 10 May 1857 in the form of a mutiny of Sepoys of the company's army in the garrison town of Meerut. So the background of the history. So the following Battle of Plassey in the year 1757 and the Battle of Buxar 1768, the British took the first step towards gaining control of northern India from Nawabs. Over time, the cumulative effect of British expansionist tactics, the economic exploitation and administrative innovations had harmed all rulers of Indian states, Sepoys, zamindars and peasants, traders, craftsmen, gurus, maulvis and so on. However, there were intermittent public eruptions in the form of political violence, tribal movements, peasants uprising, agrarian riots and civil rebellion between 1757 and 1857. Even in the famine years too, they increased the revenue expectations sparked bitterness among the Indians. Even the moneylenders had the protection of the police. Many protests against local moneylenders escalated into the rebellions against the company's control. So the next, the interference by the British in native religious and traditional rituals, it sparked discontent and led to the rebellions. So the rebellions and uprising happened almost from the beginning of the British reign from the various regions and various places. Even after the 1857 revolt, some of the movements persisted. Major revolts broke out in the south, east, west and north events districts. So when we come to the causes, so the causes of the revolt of 1857 is the expansionist of the imperialist policies of British East India Company had negative impacts on all sections of the society, including the rulers, peasants and the traders, etc. It was not solely triggered by one policy or event. Instead, it arose from the combination of a political, economic, administrative and the social religious factors are going to. Now we discuss about the causes one by one briefly. The first cause is economic causes. The East India Company colonial practices shattered Indian society, conventional economical and foundations. Due to the severe taxes, peasants were forced to take out loans from the moneylenders, traders at excessive interest rates with the latter. Frequently evicted the farmers from the property for non-payment or the loan use. So the zamindar system had been in place, it take place for a long time, had to be dismantled. The artists and handicrafts people suffered during the British administration as well. Furthermore, the British policies discouraged the Indian handicrafts to sell British items. This is too the biggest cause for this event. At the same time, imports of British products into the India were subject to cheap duties which encouraged their arrivals. The cotton and silk textiles exports from India and virtually ceased by the mid-19th century. With the frequent use of the status quo by the state, zamindars and the traditional landed nobility had their property rights confiscated. The Sepoy revolution provided a chance for these dispossessed talukdars to confront the British and reclaim what they had lost. The collapse of the Indian industry increased the burden on the cultural and land which could no longer sustain all of the country's inhabitants. The country's uneven development led to the poverty in general. So next one is administrative causes. And the corruption was widespread in the company's administration, particularly among the police, minor officials and subordinate courts, which was a major source of the dissatisfactions. Many historians believe that the current levels of corruption in India was a result of the company's control. So next one is the socio and religious causes. When we come to know about the social and religious causes, the first and main thing is the British administration. Its attitude towards the negative and native Indian population had a negative impact on public Indians, viewed the activity of Christian missionaries in India, flew the British flag with disgust. The initiatives at social religious change, such as the elimination of sati, support of widow remarriage, and the women's education, and outsiders also interference in the social and religious spheres of the Indian culture. So these spheres were worsened by the government's decision to take tax on mosque and temple lands and the passage of laws take the Religious Disabilities Act of 1856, which also led to this event. And the main thing is not prevent the son of from inheriting his heathen father's property, which is called doctrine of lapse. So next one is the military causes. When we come to the military causes, so much of causes are there. So the sepoys' religious views and biases increasingly clashed with the circumstances of duty in the company's army and the cantonments. Indian sepoys were generally conservative by their nature. So crossing the seas meant losing one's caste to the faithful, hence Hindus of the period. The General Service Enlistment Act passed by the Lord Canning's administrator in the year 1568. So it speaks about that they have to cross the sea to wherever the government wanted the services. So there was a animosity of a result of this. So in this comparison to his British colleague, the Indian sepoy was equally dissatisfied with his pay. The edict that they would not be awarded the foreign service allowances, that is better, when serving in Sindh or Punjab was a more immediate source of displeasure of these sepoys. The accession of award, the home of numerous sepoys aggravated their emotions even more. At very turn, the Indian sepoys was treated as a second-class citizenship. In the truth, the sepoys was a peasant in uniform whose mindset was not separated from the lot of the rural populace. And finally, it sparkled and it sparked out into the immediate cause. The incidence of greased cartridge finally sparked the revolt of 1857. There was a rumor that the new Enfield rifles cartridges were lubricated with the cow and pig fat. The sepoys had to nibble off the paper on the cartridges before loading these guns. So they were rebuffed by both Hindus and Muslim sepoys. Lord Canning attempted to right the wrong by withdrawing the problematic cartridges, but the harm had already been done. There was rioting in several locations. The revolt began on May 10, 1857 at Meerut, 58 kilometers from Delhi, and quickly spread across Lord's territory, encompassing Punjab in the north and the Narmada in the southern, as well Bihar in the east and Rajputana in the west. There were rumblings of dissatisfactions in many cantonments even before the Meerut tragedy. In February 1857, the 19th Native Infantry at Baharampur, it was in West Bengal, which refused to use the naval, that is newly imported Enfield rifle and mutinied, was dissolved. The Mangal Pandey, a young sepoy in the 34th Native Infantry, went a step further and shot his unit's sergeant major at Barakpur. This also had a fire impact on the British army. On April 8, he was overcome and hanged, and his unit was dissolved in May. There was a blast in Meerut. The lubricated cartridges were declined by 90 troops of the 3rd Native Cavalry on April 24th. On May 9, 85 of them were found guilty, condemned to 10 years in the jail and placed in shackles. The Indian soldiers stationed at Meerut erupted in the widespread mutiny as a result of this. They liberated their imprisoned friends the next day. May 10 executed their superiors and raised the insurrection flag. After sunset, they left for Delhi. The greased cartridges did not establish a new source of dissatisfaction in the army. Rather, they provide the catalyst for long simmering resentment to surface. So next, the contribution of the civilians. So next, the contribution of civilians in the sense, the other outsiders also, they participated in the mutiny. The Sepoy revolt was accompanied by a civil populist uprising mainly in the northwestern region and Awadh. Their long-held complaints were quickly expressed and they rose in force to voice their resistance to British authority. The farmers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, day laborers, zamindars, religious mendicants, priests and public servants also participated in the insurrection, giving in actually power and the appearance of the population rise. Peasants and petty zamindars vented their frustrations hereby the assaultant, the moneylenders and zamindars who had evicted them from their land. So within a month after the rebels captured Delhi, the uprising had spread to other religions and countries. So the reasons for the failure of the revolt. So the main reasons, so much of the reasons to suppress this Sepoy mutiny, some of the main reasons are so the All India participants were absent. One cause was the revolt's limited geographical extension. It lacked an all India veneers. India's eastern, southern and western regions were mostly unharmed. This was mostly due to the company's harsh suppression of previous uprising in those areas. So all classes did not join. Even Awadh, Talukdars backed off after pledges of land restoration were spelled out and big zamindars served as stormbrokers. So the moneylenders and the merchants were also not participated here. So the educated Indians saw the insurrection as background looking pro-feudal and a backlash to modernity by old conservative forces. These individuals had great hopes that the British would usher in a period of modernization. The majority of Indian kings declined to join the frequent aid. The British for arms and equipments. The Indian forces were inadequately armed and fighting mostly with swords and spears with few cannons and muskets. The European soldiers, on the other hand, were armed with cutting the weaponry such as the Enfield rifle. The electric telegraph kept the commander-in-chief up to date on the rebels' movements and plans. Uncoordinated and poorly organized, the uprising was poorly organized with no central leadership or coordination. This was the main cause. And in terms of generalship and the main rebel commanders, Nana Sahib, Tantia Tope, Kunwar Singh and Lakshmi Bai were no matches for the British opponents. The East India Company, on the other hand, was lucky to have the persons remarkable abilities such as the Lawrence brothers, John Nicholson, James Ottoman and Henry Havelock and others. So there is no unified ideology. The mutineers lacked a thorough knowledge of colonial control as well as its future-oriented agenda, a cohesive philosophy and political vision and a sociological alternative. These insurgents represented a variety of forces with varying grievances and political ideologies. At this point in Indian history, a lack of unity among the Indians was probably inseparable. So in India, modern nationalism was unheard of. In reality, the insurrection of 1857 was essential in drawing the Indian people together and instilling in them a sense of belonging to a single country. The nature and consequences of the revolt. So the uprising of 1857 was a watershed moment in Indian history. It resulted in significant changes in the British government's administrative systems and policy. The revolt was described by British historians as a Sepoy mutiny. The British historians believed that the Sepoys as well as some landholders and princes with vested interest. So they organized the insurrection, ignoring the local people's concerns and involvement in the movement. The next one is the self-interest reasons. So according to the recent study in 1857, did not play a significant role prior to the consecrated opposition to the unpopular British administration. The revolt of 1857 is considered by some historians to be the first struggle for Indian independence. Those who disagree with this perspective say that the rebel leaders did not try to create a new social order. This dissatisfied devotions and intervention were shattered, and they frequently looked back to society those who disagree with this perspective say that the rebel leaders did not try to create a new social and social order. The dissatisfied devotions and interventions were shattered, and they frequently looked back to society and policies that were no longer feasible. As a result, it was a restoration rather than a revolution. So next one is the Indo-Muslim unity. So this is very important. At all levels of the revolt, people, troops and leaders, there was a perfect collaboration between Hindus and Muslims. All rebels recognized Bahadur Shah Zafar, a Muslim, as emperor, and a Hindu Sepoys in Meerut immediately began marching to Delhi, the Mughal imperial capital. Two things stand out plainly in the middle of the complex tale of the rising of 1857. Maulana Azad writes about this. The first is the incredible sense of oneness that existed enduring in India during this time between Hindus and Muslims. The order is the people's great devotion to the Mughal crown. Both Hindus and Muslims, rebels and sepoys acknowledged each other's feelings. Once the insurrection was successful in a given location, an immediate ban on cow slaughters was imposed. Both Hindus and Muslims were well represented in the leadership of examples. Nana Sahib had Hazimullah, a Muslim who specialized in political advertising, as an advisor, while Lakshmi Bai had Afghan warriors on her side. Thus, the events of 1857 revealed that the prior to 1858 India's people and the politics were not fundamentally communal or secretarial. So next one is the result of the 1857 revolt. So the results of the 1857, very few points. So the end of the East India Company's rule. This was the end of the East India Company's rule and had ruled India for over a century. The revolt of 1857 showed that it was no longer able to maintain control of the colony, and the British government decided to abolish the company and take direct control of India. So the establishment of direct rule, British rule, and after a revolt, India was ruled directly by the British crown. This meant that the British government had more control over the British administration of India. They could make decisions without having a consult of East India Company. The creation of the Indian Civil Service. The Indian Civil Service was created in 1858. This was to provide a cadre of British officials to administer India. The ICS was recruited through a competitive examination. It was trained in British law and administration. So next one is rise in nationalism among the Indians. So hereafter the Indian became the patriotic, in between the Indian peoples, the patriotic sense began a lot. The revolt of 1857 showed the Indians that they could unite against the British and fight for their independence. This led to a rise in nationalism among the Indians. It also led to the formation of a new political organization such as the Indian National Congress in 1885. So renewed interest in Indian culture and heritage. The many Indians began to look back to the past and take pride in the traditions. This led to a revival of Indian art, literature and music. So the reorganization of the army. The British army was reorganized to reduce the risk of another mutiny. The proportion of British soldiers in the Indian army was increased. Indian soldiers were no longer allowed to serve in groups from the same region. So the conclusion, when we come to the conclusion, so nothing but some more points are there. So for the first time in 1857, peasants' dissatisfaction along the protests from each other areas of society united disparate an element of society together in a coherent campaign against the British takeover. Many parts of Indian society were brought together for a similar purpose, although in a limited fashion. So despite the fact that the revolution failed to achieve its aim, it did sow the seeds of Indian nationalism. Many historians see the events of 1857 as an early indication of nationalism. Thank you all.